This episode got surprisingly tragic from the undead, remains of who once were your friends and family to the kind of like passing scene of really the real mother of Menel, and to just see the kind of like depressing thoughts that an elven person would have, right? I mean, if you're surrounded by elves or those who can live far past the average human lifestyle, an elven life isn't going to be all that tragic. They might get bored per se, but they're not going to be sad about watching everyone they love and know die around them, because it's similar to that of a human lifestyle. Unless someone killed them or something tragic happened, they're all going to roughly live the same age. But when you're kind of like ostracized and pushed away because your whore of a mother, as they'll see it, had you, died immediately, and you're pretty much pushed away, and if it wasn't for your great hunter skills, you probably would have been a prostitute in an alley just to feed yourself. To then have someone really cherish you and love you, and to really, at first, because I just kind of assume, because it's just natural to just not really second guess things when you're watching, and then when they hit you with the feels or the facts, you kind of feel a little silly. When you see the old woman ghost, right, I just kind of thought it was like a grandmother figure, right? You don't really second guess it, but you probably should in hindsight. And to see what she looked like years back and just everything like that, to see the one who kind of brought that village together, who, she stuck around for one last lecture for him, to just see like the idea of passing the knowledge of what they think is going on with the reason why these monsters came down in the first place. It was one of those journeys that I just wasn't expecting, but like I said, in hindsight, probably should. Elven blood, things like that, most of the people surrounding, it's not really someone who's gonna live as long as someone with elven blood. But when you kick off the arc with these characters, the idea of like raiding and trying to kill another village just so you can survive, there's never really a reason to go outside that comfort zone in terms of thinking what it could all mean, when everything at face value kind of makes sense on why characters were behaving in certain ways. And that moment at the very end where Menel's pretty much talking like, sometimes I wish I could just die, because everyone around me, because where I live, they're not going to live as long as me. And it's something that's completely understandable. How many times, because, imagining nothing bad happened, how long and how many connections will this character have by the time Menel's lifespan finally ends? It'll be like going through a dozen different marriages where you probably love each and every one, right? It's just like these friends, these family members, like you could essentially have multiple mother and father figures. It's a pretty painful experience, and I'm really surprised by this episode. Not that I don't think the show's capable of moments like these, it just kind of gave me the impression that, like, something like the undead remains of the village, like, that's in the realm of possibilities for me, but that just real moment, and just the fact that, getting the blessing of Gracefield, it's something that just really continues to elevate this show higher. And I truthfully still feel most production committees, had they had their hands on this source material, this type of stuff just either wouldn't be here, or, we would have covered the past 7 episodes in like 4, and you could really tell how it could butcher it and make everything feel half-assed, as there's no build-up, or you don't really care, or you just look at characters as being scumbags and things like that, rather than seeing how there really is no rules of law in this type of area, this continent, right? And I really appreciate just seeing how far into the character personalities and mindsets they're going, because they didn't need to. Not to say the author didn't need to, but in terms of anime, in terms of how it needs to get across the main point, you could have skimmed over so much. But seeing how they had like an extra supply of like food and beverages, the fact that they're going to have a kind of party to celebrate the return, and then the real hard work will begin. You don't necessarily need to have that in the anime, but it adds an extra bit of charm to a pretty depressing situation. When it came to the undead remains and the flinching, I thought was handled so well. I was originally going to say that was my favorite part of the episode, but then they kind of hit me with the extra field truck where it was the whole idea of outliving your loved ones. But this moment and seeing like what looked like charred remains, it almost looked like burn victims. And the fact that, the ritual that was going on, it just the craziness and the torment that they put these characters through, and a young boy just being like, I've been waiting for you now, and just to see like the flinching, because most people would. It's something that, imagining looking at someone you care about and they're now that. It's heartbreaking, and to not even realize what's happened to you, and then to have the kindness of just a great paladin who's remaining to feel like a paladin, kind of like that bringer of light, and to give them all that parting scene, and the fact that after that initial shock and the kind of like best wingman status that you could hope for from Will, basically saying, oh, you know, just very big shock because so happy, and the fact that they all just like took care of business, and how after that he didn't flinch at all. I think to see moments like those are what make a show like The Faraway Paladin so great, because essentially the story is all about sending Gracefield's light into the world and just kind of sharing her blessings. The idea of death and rebirth and the cycle that this god believes in. And to have that in the face of such pain, I think is probably the most warranted thing. I think is like pretty much why it's so beautiful as much as it is tragic. And the action, while it didn't last as long as maybe some of the other fights, I still remain to really like how one intelligent Will is as a character immediately was able to decipher what enemies he was going to face after the description, so he knew he could lunge in head first, wasn't an idiot about it, didn't just peek over the ledge, see if he could handle it, no, got the information. And then to see how he just was like using like almost like oil on the floor to make people trip, the speed as per usual, which is always going to be a main attack, I think, with the spear and the speed amplifier, and just everything like that. Even though it wasn't like the craziest animation you're going to see in terms of a fight scene, the elements that made the scene so complex made it very engaging. And I love the kind of like dissolving effect when he does kill some of these creatures. It's just a really cool kind of like extra element that I don't think they needed to do. They could have easily just had the characters fall down, but the kind of dissolving effect really gives it an extra sense of impact, I find, which really makes Faraway Paladin in his action scenes even better than it needed to be necessarily, right? I'm hoping that, you know, we're gonna have these two kind of like remain to be kind of traveling companions, at least for the remainder of this core, even if they don't necessarily stick by forever. Though if they did part ways here, it would be understandable, right? Because ultimately, like, probably the best warrior to probably protect your village is, you know, an archer, and do you really want to let him go? It's hard to say, but either way, I'm glad that connections are being made, and I'm glad that, like, Blood and Mary aren't being forgotten, like, Will's actively in his own mind and kind of thinking about, hey, like, I finally made my first friend. It's something that should be relevant in his psyche, and the fact that from the religious aspect to the family aspect to the personal friendship aspect, nothing's being forgotten or just ham-fisted in to be a random connection, but more so, it feels personal as if it's real people interacting, which makes The Faraway Paladin such a masterpiece in my mind. But let me know your thoughts and feelings on this episode that I found to be pretty emotional. What did you think? Favorite moment? Leave a like if you enjoyed, and subscribe if you're new around here. So until next time, everyone, please take care and have a good one.